Let's get one thing straight right now. This is not diplomacy anymore. This is a countdown. The United States has just issued a 48-hour ultimatum to Iran, and the message couldn't be clearer: comply, or watch your country's critical infrastructure get systematically dismantled. We're not talking about symbolic strikes, not warnings, not political theater. We're talking about power plants, bridges, the backbone of an entire nation, targeted, calculated, and potentially wiped out. And if you think this is just another round of empty threats, stay with me, because what's happening behind the scenes is far more serious than anything being publicly acknowledged. This didn't start with the ultimatum. It started with pressure, escalation, and a series of moves that pushed both sides closer and closer to the edge. Because while most people were distracted, something critical was happening in one of the most important locations on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Now understand this clearly. That narrow stretch of water controls nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply. You disrupt that. You don't just create a regional issue. You trigger a global crisis. And that's exactly where the tension exploded. Iran was accused of interfering with shipping routes, slowing, restricting, and in some cases effectively blocking movement through the strait. And the reaction? Immediate. Markets shook. Oil prices spiked. Military alerts went up. But here's where things take a turn most people didn't expect. The United States didn't respond with quiet diplomacy. It responded with a deadline. 48 hours. That's not negotiation. That's pressure at the highest level. And the warning attached to that deadline, it wasn't vague. It was specific. If Iran fails to comply, key infrastructure will be hit, not military bases, infrastructure. Think about what that actually means. Electricity grids go down, cities lose power, transportation collapses. Economic activity freezes overnight. This isn't just about weakening a military. This is about putting an entire system under stress. And if you think that sounds extreme, it gets worse, because this kind of targeting sends a very specific message. It says, we're not just willing to fight, we're willing to escalate in ways that change daily life inside your country. That's not just strategy, that's coercion. Now here's the part nobody is saying out loud, but everyone in military and political circles understands. Once infrastructure becomes a target, the rules change, because retaliation doesn't stay limited. It expands, and Iran made that very clear. Instead of backing down, Iranian leadership signaled that any attack on their internal systems would trigger a response, not just against the United States, but across the entire region. Energy assets, shipping lanes, allied positions, everything becomes fair game. And suddenly what looked like a bilateral standoff starts to look like something much bigger. But stay with me, because this is where the situation becomes genuinely dangerous. Because while the public sees statements and headlines, what's happening behind the scenes is movement, military positioning, asset deployment, strategic readiness. These are not things you do unless you're preparing for the possibility that the ultimatum fails. And here's the uncomfortable reality. Deadlines like this don't exist in a vacuum. They create pressure on both sides. On one side, the U.S. has to be ready to follow through or risk looking weak. On the other, Iran has to decide whether compliance looks like surrender. And that's where miscalculation happens. That's where escalation becomes almost inevitable, because if either side reads the other wrong, even slightly, the next move isn't negotiation, it's action. And if you think that action would be limited, think again. Because once infrastructure strikes begin, the response doesn't come in press conferences, it comes in retaliation. And retaliation in this region rarely stays contained. Now let's step back for a second, because most people are focusing on the threat itself, not what it represents. This is not just about the Strait of Hormuz. It's not just about shipping routes or oil prices. This is about control. Control over energy, control over regional influence, and ultimately, control over who dictates the rules in one of the most strategically important areas in the world. And here's the critical part most people are missing. This kind of ultimatum signals that patience is running out. Not slowly, not gradually, but rapidly. And when patience runs out in geopolitics, decisions get made faster with less room for error. And that's exactly the environment we're in right now. Fast decisions, high stakes, minimal margin for miscalculation. But if you think the economic impact alone is the biggest risk here, it's not. Because what happens next, if this ultimatum is ignored, has the potential to trigger a chain reaction that goes far beyond infrastructure damage. And trust me, once that chain reaction starts, it doesn't stop where you expect it to. Now let's stop talking about possibilities and start talking about what this actually looks like if the 48-hour deadline expires. Because at that point, this isn't strategy anymore, it's execution. The first strikes wouldn't be random, they wouldn't be chaotic, they would be precise, calculated, and designed to hit maximum pressure points in the shortest possible time. Power plants go first. Why? Because electricity is the foundation of everything else. Shut down major grids, and within hours you're looking at blackouts across entire regions. Hospitals switch to backup power, communication networks begin to strain, industrial output slows or stops completely. And that's just the beginning, because if you thought that alone would be enough, it won't be. Next comes transportation infrastructure, bridges, key logistical routes, critical connectors that keep cities supplied and economies moving. Take those out, and you're not just creating inconvenience, you're isolating regions, disrupting supply chains, and amplifying internal pressure from within. And here's where it gets even more serious. These strikes wouldn't just send a message to Iran, they would send a message to the entire region, a demonstration of capability, a demonstration of willingness, and more importantly, a demonstration that escalation thresholds have fundamentally changed. But stay with me, because this is where the situation stops being one-sided, because Iran's response wouldn't come slowly, it would come fast, and it would come hard. We're talking about ballistic missile launches targeting US assets in the region, military bases, naval positions, forward operating locations that suddenly become high-value targets overnight. And if you think those responses would be limited to direct US targets, think again, because Iran doesn't operate alone. This is where the broader network comes into play. Proxy forces across the region, already positioned, already prepared, would activate multiple fronts, multiple directions, multiple layers of pressure designed to stretch defenses thin. And suddenly, what started as a 48-hour ultimatum becomes a multi-theater conflict. But here's the part that most people underestimate, the global fallout. Because this doesn't stay contained geographically. The moment the Strait of Hormuz is fully disrupted, or even perceived to be at risk, energy markets react instantly. Oil prices don't just rise, they spike. And when energy prices spike, everything follows. Transportation costs increase, manufacturing slows, food prices climb. Within days, not weeks, you start feeling it far beyond the Middle East. And that's when governments around the world are forced into reaction mode. Emergency meetings, strategic reserves discussions, economic contingency planning, because this isn't just a military crisis anymore, it's a global economic shock. But if you think the economic side is the worst case scenario, it's not, because the real danger lies in escalation without control. Let me explain. When strikes begin, each side starts making decisions under pressure. Incomplete information, limited time, high stakes, and that's exactly when mistakes happen. A missile goes off course. A target is misidentified. A response is interpreted as something bigger than it actually is. And suddenly both sides are reacting not just to actions, but to perceived intentions. That's how conflicts spiral, not always by design, but by momentum. And once that momentum builds, it becomes incredibly difficult to slow down. Now layer onto that the involvement of other global powers, because they won't stay passive. Strategic alliances, economic interests, regional influence, all of it gets pulled into the equation. Diplomatic channels become strained, positions harden, and the space for de-escalation starts shrinking rapidly. But here's the question nobody can afford to ignore. What is the actual end game? Because once infrastructure is hit, once retaliation begins, once global markets are shaken, what does resolution even look like? Is it deterrence? Is it dominance? Or is it simply survival at that point? And that's what makes this moment so critical. Because right now, before that 48-hour window closes, there is still a choice, a narrow one, a fragile one, but a choice nonetheless. After that, events take over, and decisions get replaced by reactions, and reactions are far harder to control. So here's the bottom line. This ultimatum is not just a warning, it's a trigger point. A line that once crossed, shifts everything from controlled tension to active confrontation. And the world is now watching one question unfold in real time. Will this deadline force a step back or push everything forward into something far more dangerous? Because if it's the second option, you won't need analysts to explain what's happening. You'll see it, you'll feel it. And by then, it will already be too late to stop it. If you've made it this far, you already understand how serious this is. So stay informed, stay alert, because what happens next won't unfold slowly. It will happen fast. And when it does, you'll want to be ahead of it, not trying to catch up after the fact.